this is a special session on entitled, the place of diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education strategy. Today, we'll be having three speakers, three panelists for this special session. And I will be introducing the three panelists, and I will invite them to present their talk on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there are some specific questions that they will be addressing in their speeches. So I will start introducing Dr. Solomon. Dr. Solomon Makonnen, he is from Ethiopia. He is currently the director for the community-based rehabilitation program and scholars program as well at the University of Gondar. He, by profession, he is associate professor of nutrition at the Institute of Public Health at the University of Gondar. And prior to his position as director for community-based rehabilitation and scholars program, he has served at different positions at the university. And I don't want to go to the details of his former positions. We worked together at the University of Gondar. He's a great colleague. So he'll be one of the panelists today. And the second one will be Leon Laura Uzwi. I'm sorry if I'm not naming it correctly, so it's easy for me to call you Laura, so she can say it very clearly. So Laura will be our speaker. So she's a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager at Kepler, Rwanda, and she's a professional educator with 11 years of experience in education, career, and human rights-based approach, including the right to education. Currently, Laura serves as diversity, equity, and inclusion manager at Kepler, where most of the responsibilities are related to making Kepler a safe working learning environment in which every member is able to express, learn, and grow regardless of differences, with consideration of marginalized communities in all of the Kepler's work. Laura has a master's degree in education and gender, and she's an alumni from George Washington University, and she's a certified leading diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education at workplace. So she's also an award winner of the Rwanda Women of Courage of 2018 by the U.S. Embassy in Rwanda. So the third speaker will be Dina Hadiko, and she's an inclusion consultant. Dina is a gender and inclusion consultant with over 19 years of experience working to promote women's rights and gender equality in Ghana. Over the years, she has contributed actively towards ending all forms of violence against women and children. Ms. Adiko once worked as technical advisor on gender at the Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Protection of Ghana, where she provided technical assistance to the Minister for Gender, Children, and Social Protection. As a gender and inclusion consultant, Ms. Adiko has done work for many organizations, including Plan Ghana International, World Bank, Star Ghana, Parliament of the Republic of Ghana, University of Education, Winneba, among others. So she has once a board member of the Ghana Education Trust Fund, and currently Dina works as a key advisor on gender equality and social inclusion. with transforming teaching, education, and learning at Ghanaian non-profit organizations that provides us quality technical advice, project management, research, and implementation support services to enable Ghana's education system reach gender heights. So I would like to welcome all of the three panelists today. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Desalegn Mengesha. I'm currently working for the Ohio State University Global One Health Initiative as the Regional Admin Director. My office is based in Addis Ababa, but we work for Eastern Africa. Formerly, I was the president of the University of Gondar, where Solomon and Mikias are working. We have been involved in the scholars program, the MasterCard, which is sponsored by the MasterCard Foundation. So with this introduction, I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Solomon, to go ahead and present his speech.
Thank you, Dr. Desalegn. Thank you so much for the brief introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And I'd like to say why the diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts in Africa in higher education. In Africa and higher education, diversity, equity, and inclusion means encouraging peoples of different background enjoying equal access to higher education institution. In the context of limited resource in Africa, in the continent, could be a tricky subject and leave much of the programming on inclusion to the will of the institutional leaders as well as the availability of finance. That appreciates the difference by removing, barriers in person with disability or providing reasonable accommodation, which includes reasonable accommodation like physical spacing, accessibility, academic accessibility, social accessibility, or in a nutshell, I can say that establishing barriers-free ecosystem for disability students. And why DI is important in higher institutes. DI is important in Africa, higher education institute, as the region is in a diverse and there is a need to take specific and proactive initiative to bring about the desired change to be inclusive in higher education. There is a rapid population growth, as you all know, in the continent. Therefore, there is a need to establish or strengthening the program that will ensure reasonable accommodation of the people of different disability and gender, race, ethnics, and social background in the continent. How does DIO present itself in Africa? When we see this one, African higher education institution could do a lot to promote diversity, equity, inclusion in student as well as in staff. To address the challenge, which is a negative attitude, technological barriers, lack of understanding among staff, can be administrative staff or faculty. As you all know, because of most of the academic program has not been designed with the accessibility in mind, African higher education require due attention in providing all the above mentioned barriers to have a better access education opportunity. May I stop here and give the next, or shall I proceed to the other issue?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Solomon. We are trying to address specific questions, and I'm hoping that you do have the questions with you.
Thank you very much. So first and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to HEC and Gondar University to bring together this honorable panel and audience to discuss this noble cause. So if I explain the three concepts and what they mean in higher learning institution and link them to Africa, diversity in simple words means representation in numbers. This means when we open doors to different people in hiring and admission, we also set quotas. So like percentages of the representation of people, of diversity, of the different people that we want to bring in the institution. For instance, in different institutions, they have quotas like the percentage of women versus the percentage of men, percentages of people with disabilities, percentages of refugees, percentages of displaced people, and other marginalized communities. So diversity itself is representation in numbers, how many and of the differences that we are bringing on board. Equity, on the other hand, means accessibility. So it responds to the individual needs in terms of resources, infrastructures, and opportunities. If we take an example, we can have like buildings that that accommodate a big number of students. But if we forget like one or two students living with disabilities who will not be able to have access to the buildings, then this means that we did not ensure equity of the resources to people living with disability. So, and then inclusion responds to the concerns of the attitude towards that diversity. So if we are able to bring the differences in our campuses, in our institutions, we also have to make sure that we have the art of living together. A higher learning institution is a very big community with different backgrounds, beliefs, and attitudes. So it is very important to make the institution inclusive through capacity building of the community, design inclusive policies and procedures to make sure all the beneficiaries are considered. So in some cases, organizations want to try one of the three concepts, but it is not possible to achieve D&I practices without considering the three together. We do not have to choose whether we go with diversity or if we go with equity or if we go with inclusion, because if we have the diverse people in the campus, but we do not have the art of living together, or we do not have the facilities to accommodate every single need, then this means that we are not achieving any of the three concepts. So we have to make sure that this diversity goes hand in hand with equity and goes hand in hand with inclusion. So then why is the D&I important in higher education institution strategy in Africa? Higher learning institution prepares students for the workforce. So in the workforce, there is a diverse community, which needs the service from skilled people. Without D&I strategy, we are not enabling graduates to interact with diverse community at the workplace. Another reason why it is very important, learning does not only come from the curriculum set, but in the collaboration and the innovation, learning new experience from diverse background. And this is going to enrich the innovation and collaboration for the students and the employees. So next point, why I think it's very important, Sub-Saharan Africa accounts 3/4 of global extreme poor population. And the world has given itself a target to eradicate poverty in 2030 through SDGs. Most of these communities that you are talking about that live in extreme poverty, they are under also these marginalized communities that we are talking about. This is why we talk about D&I, because we want to think of this number that doesn't really get the services we offer. So these people do not have access to tertiary education because in most of the time it is expensive. So higher learning institutions should play a role to eradicate this cycle of poverty. And of course, we all know that the more people are educated, the more they take care of themselves and they take care of the continent and solve the problems around us. Well, it's also important to note that if higher education institutions strive for D&I, this is going to make a huge impact on SDG 4, which is quality education. There is also SDG 5, gender equality, and also SDG 8, 9, 10, and 16, which are more of well-being and innovation and sustainable cities and peace. These SDGs go hand in hand with the Agenda 2063, priorities for Africa, and goals to achieve, I would say, to achieve standard living and quality life with well-educated citizens. So, everybody understand that if we are talking about quality education and well-educated citizens, it means that we are not going, the higher education institutions are not going to achieve the goal of the development if we are not including these 40% that are still living in poverty. So, and the last point, higher learning institutions have a responsibility to advocate for D&I, especially marginalized communities, through research and publication, to enable decision makers to safeguard Africa's heritage and talents and uproot inequalities in education, such as girls' education, ethnicity, social and geographical underserved communities. So we should promote hiring and promote people from diverse communities to bring diverse experiences, skills, and talents, which are the key drives of our mission. During this period of COVID-19, we have learned a lesson that, when physical classes were closed, we learned a lesson that we should make sure that we teach people more about technology. But looking at these communities, we have to make sure that they have accessibility to our resources. So how do we make sure that the programs that we have are going to be accessible if we only attract people who are technological savvy? So now D&I, the way to present itself in Africa and current practices in higher institutions. There are different steps that African institutions have taken, such as availing scholarship to deserving students and striving for gender equality. And also partnership like these ones and discussions also enable us to make sure that we are making steps to learn from each other, and they help us also to redesign our missions and visions so that we make sure that we accommodate all these communities that we intend to forget, yet they make a big community of Africans. Maybe I will stop from here, and I'll have some other time also to respond or to talk more about other pressing issues in D&I.
May not be considering, the policies, country policies, national policies. So, what is your experience in terms of, bringing the higher education leaders on board, to consider diversity, equity, inclusion as a major component of the teaching learning process? On top of that, from my experience, even the curriculum and also, as you mentioned, the teaching learning technologies are not always adapted to include, people, the students with, special needs. So what are your insights on the role of the leadership, as well as, the importance of, customizing the curriculum, as well as educational technologies to address, the challenges of students with special needs in African higher education?
Thank you very much for the question. First, I would like to say that without the leadership will of the institution, the D&I would continue to be a dream that will never come true. So from the experience I have at Kepler, there should be, there is, first of all, the organizational key results. We target D&I in every work that we do. It's not only that the D&I should be observed under D&I office, but every work we do, every policy that we have accommodate D&I. For instance, if we have wellness policy, then we should know, for instance, mothers particularly have the issues that are different from other people's issues. So we make sure that every aspect at Kepler is accommodating D&I. And talking about the technology part, it's very obvious that people in marginalized communities, let's talk about refugees in camps, the accessibility of technology is a very important aspect to think about, because if we are offering lessons online without accessibility to tools, then it means that people from marginalized communities are not going to access those resources. So higher learning institutions should also invest and make sure that people they serve have tools they need to make sure that they learn accordingly. So bringing leadership on board, we have policies, we have marginalized community policies, but also we review all the policies time to time to highlight gaps and recommend the best practices so that we can accommodate all the needs of the people we have. I'm not sure if I responded to all your questions, but that's the insights on the question you asked. Thank you.
Yeah, Dina. I know, Dina, you have great experience on gender and inclusion as a consultant for more than 19 years. So what are your insights? I'm sure there are different initiatives by different African universities to address, the challenge of, gender, diversity, and related issues. So what initiatives are being successful and what initiatives are not, successful? So it's just in short what has worked and what has not worked. So you can give us your insights based on experience, giving different examples as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers for having us. This is a very important conversation. Standing on the explanations that have been provided by the earlier speakers, I would say DEI is still picking up within higher education institutions across our continent. And some work has been done relating to, particularly what has worked is increasing level of awareness. The conversation around diversity, the conversation around equity and equality, the conversation about inclusion, which ultimately is the outcome of all the efforts, is picking up. We have had a situation of increased awareness, acceptance of the fact that there are different members of the constituency the education institution seeks to serve, and how do we identify them? So a broad conversation, some level of openness about what has to be done. Some organizations, some institutions have done a great deal of work. We've heard about Kepler, we know about Ashesi, and some public universities in Ghana and other parts of Africa are beginning to also introduce policies. So some of the things that have worked have become DEI responsive policies. Take, for example, around gender, a number of higher education institutions have developed gender policies that seek to address gaps within the organizations. We have seen an increasing commitment to develop policies around sexual harassment and safeguarding policy within institutions. And those seems to be working. A few institutions have also developed DEI policy statement. And when I say policy statement, I mean they've demonstrated their political will to be committed to addressing DEI issues within the institutions. Some have done this at that level, have demonstrated that we are committed to embracing diversity, to promoting inclusion, to providing equitable platforms for people to learn and to teach. But these have not translated into revising policies across board, where the entire university policies from enrollment to recruitment to tenure to conditions of service and all of that to infrastructure, to the extent where you notice that DEI is being transformed or is being reflected in the institutions. And those are the places we are hanging at. Our struggle to actually develop thorough, comprehensive policies that guide implementation. And for the few who have developed policies, implementations continue to be a struggle. Take, for example, the issue of sexual harassment across Africa and the world. In higher education institutions, it's one of the most predominant form of abuse in higher education institutions. And a number of organizations have developed sexual harassment policy, but quite a number of them have not backed the policy with the response mechanisms that are required for them to respond effectively. They have not backed that with increased exhaustive awareness and dissemination of the policy in such a way that members of the educational institution community are aware that these are the courses they can take in case they are being abused or they notice some form of behavior is ongoing. So our struggle is there. And then let me also talk about, again, commitment to get the gaps bridged. Let's talk about enrollment. Enrollment in our countries, for example, in Sub-Saharan Africa, only 7.1, my internet, let me turn off my video so my internet is smooth. Only 7.19% of women in Sub-Saharan Africa are enrolled in university versus 10.41% of men. And the global average for women is 41.66%. So it tells you immediately that even after talking about leave no one behind, we are struggling with enrollment. And this statistics is from UNESCO. And followed by that, I've talked about the policies. We have women again struggling to participate or to be enrolled in STEM programs. And when we say STEM, we are looking at science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We're having fewer women enrolled in STEM programs. And so I was explaining how very few women are enrolling into STEM programs in universities and higher education institutions and tertiary institutions, which has a consequence for employment and has a consequence for economic empowerment. And so when you also look at representation, I think part of the definition and explanation of diversity has been the issue of representation. It's not enough for people to speak on behalf of other people. It is required that people represent themselves. So all the diverse groups that represent within the constituency of the higher education institution must be around the decision-making table, must be around the learning table, and that is very important. But in Africa, we notice that there are fewer women in decision-making position in our academic institution. For example, only 24% of academic staff are females in Sub-Saharan Africa. Only 24%. And only 32% of African-led researchers are females. And only 8% of professors in public universities in Ghana are women. Only 8%. That's really low. That's really bad. So it tells you issues about role models, for example. If I'm a student in a university or higher education institution, and I can count at my fingertips the number of female professors there are, what does that do to my psychology and that do to my psyche and my preparedness to aim high? And how does the whole teaching professorship address issues that affect that particular group? And I know it is even worse for people with disabilities who are also professors, and the statistics gets worse as we continue to name the various diverse group. And so we talk about the same thing in senior faculty level, and the number of vice chancellors there are who are females. Ghana has the first female, University of Science and Technology, has the first female vice chancellor. And that's the university that is struggling now to increase the number of women in STEM programs. So what has worked is basically high level of awareness, some commitment to policies to address the issue. Issues around enrollment are improving. We're struggling with implementation of these policy, and it keeps getting worse down there. A lot to do when it comes to diversity. And that would be my take on the question: what has worked and what has worked there.
So I will be asking Dr. Solomon to reflect on some of the questions we have. Dr. Solomon, as you are working as in one of the public universities in Ethiopia with a big number of students with diversity and with students with disabilities, and what are your experiences on the challenge of addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion? What are the experience of the University of Gondar, and what are the challenges, and what are the experience of your university?
Thank you, Dr. Desalegn. As you all know, higher education should give priority or due attention or diversity, equity, and inclusion in their strategy. The reason why I said is that there is low awareness on disability and inclusion on the continent. However, disability is conceptualized under the strong influence of, as you know, traditional beliefs and superstition. In most rural countries, even in urban setting, disability is still linked with sin, curse, and supernatural rules. That affects, policy, programming, and intervention to promote inclusion and disability service in the higher education institute. Even girls find it hard to attend schooling and progress from lower grade elementary to higher grade like high school and even in a tertiary level due to cultural stereotype and discrimination. If you see gender together with disability, its intersectionality creates, the burden become high, especially for females, Both cultural and being disabled will be a challenge to reach to the higher level of education. So higher institutes, on the other hand, are institutions that produce professional and leaders who would assume position in the society with opportunity to play a key role in transforming society through legislation, programming, and management. So DEI is a programming and a practice in higher education. Doesn't only promote the participation of persons with disability or women or even marginalized community as a student or staff. They also enable higher education institute to produce graduates who could join the labor market with the right set of competition, skill, and attitude. So the two processes would have a ripple effect on the society to pursue political marker, to pass comprehensive DEI policy, design effective DEI program and intervention. To achieve all of the above, higher education institutes in Africa have to be deliberate, as persons with disability, for example, are one of the most marginalized groups whose voice do not usually get heard in the public discourse or in a political debates. So disability inclusion is a societal justice issue that has never been automatic or given. It requires institutions like higher education institution and actors to take a sorrowful initiative to bring to the realization. That's why disability, the DEI is relevant in higher education. To say more, in inclusive education, recognize the need to ensure educational institute to include everybody, as you all know, and celebrate differences and support learning and respond to the individual's need. As such, disability inclusion in higher education institute constitutes a range of program, service, support. So providing reasonable accommodation is very important. Okay. Like, providing reasonable accommodation is really very important to have, access education opportunity for person with disability, like sign language translation assistant, assigning assistant to a person with disability depending on the type of disability they have, because this management is a case-by-case management, because the individual to individuals, have person with disability having hearing loss or multiple disability require a different assistive support. So the other challenge in higher education is curriculum design and its implementation. So this creating, promoting awareness on disability inclusion, organizing a disability day event, workshop in inclusion, training, and special needs skills are some of the very important in addressing awareness on about inclusion in the higher education institutes. And the other important issue is mainstreaming disability in the institute policy and strategy, as well as the program and service. Education share a lot with institutes that have additional challenge in higher education on disability and inclusion beliefs. And the other one is overreaching policy and strategies that govern and monitor the programming and implementation of disability inclusion service. And the last one is resource constraint, and there is low private or charitable contribution in Africa with regard to inclusive education. Over to you.
Maybe to Laura, from your experience at Kepler, what is your experience? I know that you are working on employability as well as career development. So, what are the challenges in employability for students with disabilities? All issues in diversity, inclusion, equity issues. So, can you tell us your experience on career development and employability?
Thank you very much. So at Kepler, the experience we have so far, the students living with disabilities we have now are not yet to go to employment. They are still in the program. But I'll talk the experience overall in the institutions here in Rwanda. First and foremost, the higher education institution, when they are going to admit students with disabilities, they are very according to disabilities that they can accommodate. For instance, people with deaf and dumb, they require programs that could be very expensive for the institution. So most of the institution, when they are going to admit, they again admit students who are fully independent. And this will leave outside the students who need other programming so that they can learn effectively. After the programs, when they get to the job market, also the perception and the mindset that any person living with disability will cost the organization a lot of money and time. People believe that people living with disabilities have also health issues that are consistent, like maybe coming to work late. They will be maybe required to change all the office settings. or they will be required to give a lot of money for the insurance, all sorts of that. So it is very important to keep advocating on the employers that if we were able to teach these students for 4 years, 5 years, or 6 years, it's very obvious that they have skills and they're able to be productive to the workplace. Also, in the job adverts, in most cases I have seen, they make sure that the adverts are closed to all categories of people. Let's say if on your job advert you don't put that you're not discriminating, and put the job description that are really closed, that are really tied to people with disabilities to apply, then this means that already it is exclusive to people living with disability. So it's still small number on the employment, even though we have policies that highlight that they should be to the workplace and work like other people, but the implementation of those policies are still a huge problem. But the more we continue to advocate, the more we get people with disabilities graduate who demonstrate that they can really do the work as other people do, the more we are going to open the employers' doors to make sure that the people with disabilities are very welcomed. But at this moment, still we are having issues with the employment of people living with disabilities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. Coming back to Dina. Dina, would you like to address some of the questions we're having from the participants in the chat box? I can mention some of the questions. One from Alex is there any difference between diversity, equity, inclusion in the West as well as in Africa?
Yes, the context is extremely important to everything we do, and that's why you keep hearing the narrative. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I will start from the question of what community or constituency do you seek to serve as a HEI? If you know the constituency or the community you are serving, the first step is to identify what category or groups of people or identities exist within that community. Even in Africa, and even in West Africa or other parts of Africa, you would notice that institution by institution may identify different forms of diversity or groups of people within the institution or who they should be serving and they are missing out on. So what the difference may be is what kind of diversity does exist within your community or you seek to reach out to, and have you embraced those? Have you found common grounds, and have you embraced your uniqueness to be able to build a culture of inclusion? So the principles may be the same. The principle may start with identify the groups, who are the various groups, identify them, what are the, maybe it's also important to diagnose the cultural issues that build resistance, and there's no need pretending or shying away from it. The cultural issues that build resistance to including certain categories of people. And let me give you a classic example. The issue of albinism, people of a different skin color or condition are particularly perceived in Africa as cursed people, cursed children, cursed human beings. So there's a lot of resistance or lack of understanding of why they are the way they are and how to be able to integrate or bring them on board, because for years past, these were people who were hidden away from society. In fact, decades and centuries ago, they were killed because they were seen as strange people from strange land, or they were aliens. Fast forward today, we do not kill them, probably we don't hide them away, but it's very difficult to set systems in place to make it easy for them to gain higher education. That kind of situation is unique to us and even parts of Africa and other parts of the world. So if you identify the kinds of groups that exist and the role you can play to address it, it becomes easy. If we look at it theoretically, it becomes a whole complex abstract thing we don't want to do. We'd rather sit and do what business as usual and not change the systems to get a lot of people on board. So for me, that's the difference. Step by step, what do you do to identify the different groups, bring them on board and make it workable, and develop your own systems. You can learn from other parts of the world. There's nothing wrong. Build it into what suits your context, and you see how happy everybody will be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dina. Maybe as a follow-up, somebody, I think by name of Aram, asked about how can we engage student community in addressing DI. Can you quickly reflect on that?
How can we engage student community? I think one of the obstacles towards promotion of inclusion, and so when we talk about diversity and we talk about equity or we talk about equality, ultimately the outcome is inclusion. So you see, diversity is our identification of the existence of different groups and ensuring representation. Equity is some of the processes we employ to promote representation. And at the end of the day, the goal is that let everybody be on board, fairly represented, included. So one of the obstacles is the lack of awareness. A lot of myths and misconceptions and stereotypes about people, especially when they do not look like us or belong to our group. And the majority would have an understanding of who they are and move, leaving the rest behind. So one of the easiest way is awareness, understanding, open-mindedness, engagement. And if you take Ashesi, for example, they're very thorough and detailed in how they address diversity issues. They want from entry, there's a way that staff and students are welcome. And you see, if you leave it as talk shop and the institution itself does not set systems in place to bring everyone on board and to create representation and inclusion, it will be difficult for students as one unit of the institution to act differently from the organization. Leadership, by example, if our institution is extremely repulsive to people with disabilities, that people with hearing impairment and vision impairment are struggling to survive, how do you expect the student body as a unit to be receptive and supportive of each other? But if they see the institution putting efforts in place to make sure that people with different abilities are actually different educational needs are brought on board fully, it leaves no room for additional work to let student body understand. So it has to be a holistic, comprehensive effort. The student body is the largest constituency when it comes to education institution, but they depend and they feed off the energy of leadership, the culture within the institution, and the change will have to be driven by the culture and the mindset and leadership of the organization, and that would be an easier way to go back to it, a lot of awareness creation and the dissemination of good policies. Thank you.
Dr. Stanley, can I comment a little bit to that question of engaging students?
Sure, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I'm bringing the experience we have at Kepler, how we engage our students in D&I. First of all, D&I is one of the Kepler 5 core values. So whoever comes to Kepler is onboarded, either staff or students. We have orientation week every time that students come in at Kepler, admitted at Kepler, and we introduce them to the D&I and the policies around D&I, including sexual harassment, including discrimination. We don't expect them at the first week or 2 weeks or months to be to understand really what D&I is, because it's even a new concept in our African context. So we make sure that we allow them to make mistakes, but through the support, with the support that we have, we make sure that they understand day per day. And also we do class observations and give feedback to the staff to make sure that if there is something we have seen in the classes that students probably are excluding students with disabilities or excluding refugees or like laughing to the accent of other students because they don't speak good English, we give those feedback to the instructors, and they make sure they have discussions with students. So we make sure that our norms are clear enough to the students, and we are repetitive and do capacity building, have focus group with students, do the audit surveys, the campus climate audit surveys, to make sure that we are correcting mistakes, because we expect mistakes to happen when we are from different background, different history, when we have different beliefs, different religions. We expect mistakes to happen, but we make sure that we give people time to learn. We give people time to do their research. We share articles, videos, time to time, to make sure that the whole community at Kepler understand what D&I is, so that they can be able to help or to uphold that culture at Kepler. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your reflection, Laura. I think we're almost ready for the breakout session. I'm asking the facilitator if there are some notifications. We'll be addressing some of the questions were asked participants maybe after the breakout session, or the team can discuss on those questions as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Desalegn. We are going to launch the breakout sessions now.
I'm ready. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, one of the first things we discussed was to look at the aspects of the marginalized communities in Africa. So each of the participants were asked to share their experiences, personal experiences relating to being marginalized. And one of the experiences which we had was when someone gave an example of a country like Nigeria and other African countries, that if you are from a particular region, you cannot access education, or you cannot be admitted to the university. For instance, in the southern parts of northern part of Nigeria, if you are from there, you cannot access education in the southern part, because the northern part is designated as educationally less qualified communities. So even if you are intelligent enough to gain admission, you cannot secure admission in the southern part, because you are considered to be from a marginalized community. And also there was an experience of being an albino, as was said earlier in general discussion, being discriminated by virtue of your skin color and your community. And one cardinal point that was raised by Jean was those that are from low-income communities, especially those that experience teenage pregnancy, because coming from low-income community already means that you are disadvantaged. If you not get pregnant or you drop out of school due to some circumstance, then you are already marginalized altogether. So those from low-income communities are still not able to access education in Africa by virtue of their economic circumstance. So those are the first things that we discussed under that. And the second part we looked at was what each of our institution is doing to work on marginalized people. And Laura talks about Kepler, that Kepler in its admission process, they always ensure 50% in their gender metrics. They always ensure 50% male, 50% female. And she also talked about the fact that at Kepler, one of the people that target as regarding marginalized people are those in refugee camp. And that 25% of their admission process every year always go to those in refugee camp. In fact, they have a campus in the refugee community that serves the people that serves the refugees and the host community of those in the refugee camps too. So, and regarding that also, he also talked about the fact that in the last admission process, a large part of they also admitted those who are living with physical disability in their admission. They are starting small, but they are really moving forward. And Lillian from Swarthmore talked about fitting how we make those from marginalized community, because we have talked about those marginalized. When we even bring them in, because they have been marginalized for so long, they are not able to fit into the community. So it's not just about bringing in marginalized people into the into education. We must also ensure that we help them to adapt, so that when we bring them in, they are able to fit in. That is one thing that Lillian emphasized on. And also, Jone is talking about a university in Kenya ensuring gender equality by 50% for both male and female in their admission process. I think this was where we stopped before time caught up with us. Laura, I don't know whether you have something to raise.
Thank you very much, Stella. So it was about just a small addition about what we think the organization, our institution should do to promote D&I. Lillian said that if she was about to revamp the program to support marginalized communities, it requires budget. So we need to make sure that budgets are allocated to the programs that we are intended to start, or the programs that we already have, to make sure that the implementation is done smoothly. So thank you. We were able to discuss about those 3 questions, and we look forward to learn from the groups that were able to discuss to all the 4 questions. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Disale.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura, and appreciate all the team members for the active participation engagement and for your great reflections. May I ask Dina to identify the note taker to present as well?
Yes, we had Dr. Sola with us. She's going to quickly run us through our notes. Let me share our screen.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been asked to present our conversation and our key findings. If I miss anything, my group, do drop in at the end. So we look at all the questions. What are the issues which have resonated with us in our group? We are looking at gender equality. We identify women in STEM is very, very important, especially as Africa is being positioned as regional, especially on innovation and entrepreneurship. We need to develop our women in STEM. The issue of role model at the faculty level is very, very important for academics and mentoring the younger ones and girls to rise up to be taking STEM subjects starting from secondary school to university level. The point about statistics, the data on low representation was quite insightful, and we feel this is actually an issue for higher institutions in Africa to take forward, starting from the vice chancellor's group, to look at how female can be more represented. So we want to see that representation improving. The need to address the low representation, I've just mentioned that. We need to look into that. I think that is quite important if you want to make our community and our nation more representative. Linking, I think Leon mentioned something about SDG, linking SDG to diversity. And I think this is also very, very important. We see it as, quite key especially in the agenda. I think she mentioned 2053, thereabouts, the priority for Africa. And again, this is quite important on energy, on quality of education, and so on. The need for intervention to promote women in STEM. Sorry if we are repeating the same thing, but this particular one is on scholarship. So giving scholarship to girls to go to university, and even we start from secondary school, the A levels, and then university to read STEM subjects, because we know that finding money for university education is a challenge. So one way of encouraging girls to take up STEM is by giving them scholarship. And I will add on to that by actually working closely with the industry, because we know that industry are also interested in raising STEM. The point was mentioned about access to technologies, particularly during the COVID. The access to technology by our students and participation, especially doing online teaching. This is one area where we see a lot of marginalization. Many students that are working from, impoverished, low environments, not having technology. What is it that our higher education are doing to support them? For example, in the Western world, we provided laptop, for all this, for students, so that they don't have any excuse of not being able to dial online for teaching. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do we regard as unique experiences in our various universities? We've broken this down to two main areas. So the African experience and the Western experience. So the African experience, we had examples, case study from North University, the STEM program that they are currently doing, which is, again, focus, maybe the umbrella is quite narrow. So maybe this is one area of actually leveraging with other universities, showcase what they are doing, let other universities know what they are doing so that we can learn. So it needs to be rolled out in other HE for increased access, and we need more opportunities. So again, I think this is one good example to perhaps maybe showcase and working collaboratively with university that is already promoting STEM program in our universities. Also linked to that is the issue of enrollment for female students. So you are asking unique experiences on having an affirmative and positive action for enrolling students into STEM program. Again, we are emphasizing on STEM because I think it's quite important. So the lower cutoff point, maybe to reduce it, but to give more access to female students into STEM subjects. Public universities have what? The SH policies. I can't remember what that means again. Dina, do you want to remind me? SH policies.
Sexual harassment, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
Sexual harassment policy. Thank you. Okay, so our unique DER experiences is that universities should have policy on harassment, bullying, and any aspect of sexual insult at our universities. This is quite important. And in the Western world, we gave example of leadership program for women. This will help in developing pipeline for leadership in various universities, as well as having DEI strategy, not just at the operational level, but at the university level. Next slide. Okay, so we now look at gender-specific priorities, since we're looking at gender. So we agree that we want to see universities increasing women representation at all levels in the HEI. So the staff, at its professional support staff, faculty, and students. The student is quite important because even at the Senate level, we should have student representation at the Senate level, coming to dialogue and listen to what is happening at the institutional level so that they can take it to the student level to improve and to enhance their student experience. We have to remember that students have come. Without students, actually, all of us will not be employed. So they are clients. And so having women representation that, their voices are being heard at various levels is quite important. Promoting safe place for women to dialogue. This has to deal with the confidence for women to come forward, discuss issues that relate to them, on whether it's on sexual harassment, insult, and harassment generally. But at least we should have a safe place where women can go to and discuss issues and concerns. We also mentioned that investment.
If you could wrap up.
Yes, I think this is last slide. So investment in faculty research for female researchers, which is very, very important because we want to build pipeline for professors, women professors. So this again, by university investing, working closely with the government to invest in women researchers. Access in terms of space for accommodation and students, which provide safety for our women to live on campus. Now, we also focus a lot on gender responsive policies. This will include providing facility for women that are returning back to work, to enable them to have facilities for child-friendly environment for nursing parents, providing working environment, flexible working environment for women, but also paternity and maternity leave. It's not something that is common, but really the university should be pushing not just for maternity leave, but also paternity leave. And I think that is our last slide, which we hope will provoke some areas for priority needs to take forward as action plan. Thank you. Thank you very much for our team. So we hand over.
Dr. Solomon, would you like to invite the note taker from your group to present the reflections as well?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Desaleng. So there are about 7 to 10 participants, and Peter is the one who is going to present. If there is an additional point, I will come back. Peter?
Yeah, I think we also talking about higher education institutions and then students with disability. In our group, I think there were some few questions and which we tried to deliberate on. And I think our first question came from Dr. Tekako, who is in our group, and it was about education institutions. And I think we had an answer from Dr. Wo, and she came with a point that this is very new, and she talked about actually from her experience, the University of Ghana is not including students with learning disability. And she was talking about some important things, which she included appropriate diagnosis for some of these students. And she came to also mention about how some international students, however, come to the school with reports, and most of them have also undergone some assessment. And for that matter, the institution actually know what is exactly what exactly the student is going through, and with such information, I think we can actually work with them. And she also talked about how University of Ghana have a way of assessing students so that they can find ways of working with them accordingly. So with such information, she thinks progress is very slow, but we are moving from one level to another. Dr. Solomon also came with an answer to Takiko's question, and he says students come from society of misconception. Yeah, wherever they come in from, they probably might not have adequate information about their condition. And she talked about how important it is for the institutions also to continue to monitor such students, especially when coming into tertiary institutions where responsibilities become even more than where in terms of learning and things of the roles of the student as compared to wherever they're coming from. So he talked about importance of monitoring such students. And Dr. Solomon also talked that at UG, this is not, there hasn't been much progress, but it's a gradual sort of process. And there's a need to identify, case by case, and also try to work with such students, especially those with sort of multiple disability. So this is what came from the question that was asked by Dr. Akeko on progress with students with disability. And we had another question from Helen that was about misconception, about mindset on disability. And Helen was asking what has worked on changing mindset of people, the successes. Wanted to hear our success stories about trying to change the mindset of people on disability. What came out, actually, an answer came from Dr. Mikias, and he stressed on orientation of inclusion, especially at the University of Gondar. So he talked about more formalized programs, and he cited an example with vision and other forms of disability, and formalizing this program and trying to include the carers and the assistants, and also talking about available devices and other equipment that could be used to assist such students, and also generally talk about inclusion. He also mentioned how existing disability organizations also assist in this. orientation programs. And he also talked about the institution trying to implement different services to make the university more inclusive. He said this is actually not, it also comes with some challenges when it comes to resources and funding of some of these products or programs, sorry. So, but the other thing he mentioned that was also great was trying to bring the students on board, especially students with disability, on board in all these programs. At the end, it's an issue of still learning and hope to progress from where they are. I will also try to throw more light on this question from Helen. And he talked about setting up of office, a special office to address issues with students with disability at the University of Ghana. And she said this has been very helpful because this office sort of sees to everything concerning these students with disability, and it runs right from accommodation to lectures, that's lecture halls, and sign interpreters to assist. All these things are dealt with from that special office for students with disability. And she also mentioned of the AT lab that has been very helpful with students, especially those with hearing and vision. And we also talked about alternate examination environment. All these things are organized by this special office. So we can see that, according to Dr. O, the special office has been very, very instrumental in working with students with disability. And even the office put up a policy statement which was approved by the university and about 4 years ago, and it has since been reviewed. Mm-hmm. So that's what came out from these two major questions. I think there was another question about areas, student areas. And
thank you so much, Peter. I'm considering that time. So thank you so much for the reflections from your group. I appreciate all the whole group for the hot discussion, as we can see from the reflections. So before we wrap up, I'm forwarding one question for the panelists. Maybe one of you can reflect. It's about intersectionality. So how does intersectionality of the various, diversity, equity, inclusion areas present advantage for higher education institutions in implementing DEI strategies? Can one of you reflect on this, please?
Thank you very much, Doctor. I would like to talk about intersectionality. So intersectionality is a combination of levels of marginality, like one person subjected to many levels of marginality. Let's say being a refugee is kind of being marginalized. But when you are a woman and living with disability in low income, this is other levels of problems that are surrounding one person. So this is what we call intersectionality. So in our programs in higher learning institutions, we have been able to identify the percentages of people we want to admit. Let's say, for instance, if we want 50-50 women and men, but to some extent you find out that men and women who are going to have access to our programs are from privileged families because they can pay their tuitions or because they can have supporters. So it is very important to think, even if we want to admit 1,000 of students and we have 500 women and 500 men, where are those people coming from? Are we really taking into consideration those women who are in rural areas? Are we considering men who come from low income levels? Are we considering refugees? So reaching the quotas itself is not enough if we are not looking into, if we are not assessing ourselves, how are we measuring the intersectionality of the students that we are serving? If we really want to promote the 40% that we have under poverty, to move them, at least to reduce that number to 10% or even to 0%, we need to make sure that we consider intersectionality. So in the strategies we put in place, let us have these quotas, but also make sure if we want to have 50% of women, where are we getting these 50% of women? Because if we do not consider this, we are only admitting or hiring women from privileged environments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. Just we're 1 minute away from ending this call. I really appreciate our panelists today for their expert reflections on the questions we had on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also appreciate all the participants for the hot discussion you did through the group work, as well as for joining us today for this special session. The issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important in Africa, especially in African higher education. It's one of the most neglected areas in many universities, not mentioning the universities who are really working well. And, from the curriculum, educational teaching methods, as well as, campus facilities, where students and faculty do have a lot of issues. So this is really serious issues that higher education institutions in Africa should address, not only in campus as well as in supporting the government in the development of policies and strategies. African universities should work beyond addressing the campus situation. It is through research and education that the countries can improve the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in Africa. We know that there are many, more than if you take Ethiopia, more than 17% of the population we had disability issues. So this is a very significant population to address the problem. So thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate Shesi University and University of Gondar for this collaborative session. It's a very important session. And once again, I would like to thank panelists as well as participants for the very fruitful session today. Thank you so much, everyone.